To apply the sleeve, the first thing we need to do is we need to ease stitch or run a basting stitch between the small circles along the cap of the sleeve. This will allow us to ease this curvature of the cap of the sleeve into the armhole. To prepare the sleeve for sewing into the jacket, we need to run a basting stitch for an ease stitch along the cap of the sleeve between our dots. So we need a basting stitch, which is the largest stitch length. We're going to run our first row at 1/4 of an inch along the cap of the sleeve. When we get to our dot, we're going to stop. And then we're going to run a second row at 5/8 of an inch parallel to the first row that we stitched between the dots. When you finish the second row, then do the same stitching to the other sleeve. To sew the underarm seam of the sleeve, we'll fold our sleeve in half, matching our notches, and we will stitch along the underarm seam of the sleeve. We will need to apply a seam finish to the seam allowances after stitching the seam. To sew our sleeve to our jacket, we're going to use the in the round method. So we need to sew our underarm seam first. So we're going to fold our sleeve in half, matching our underarm edges. We're going to match at the armhole. We're going to match at the bottom of the sleeve, as well as matching our notches, and pin that. After pinning our underarm seam, you'll do the same thing to the other side for the other sleeve to pin the underarm seam. After pinning the underarm seams, to make sure that you have pinned the sleeves correctly so that you'll have a left sleeve and a right sleeve, lay the sleeves with the center of the sleeve together and make sure that they're going in opposite directions, but that you have the same side of the sleeve up. So I have a single notch, so I have the front of my sleeve facing up. I also have a single notch, so I have the front of my sleeve facing up. So I know that I've pinned both of my sleeves with right sides together so that I will end up with a left and a right sleeve. To sew the underarm seam, we're going to use a 5/8 inch seam allowance, so line the edge of your fabric up with a 5/8. We're going to use a regular stitch length, so make sure that you've set your machine back to regular stitch length from the basting. We're going to back stitch, and then we'll sew along the underarm seam. When we get to the end, we'll back stitch. Once you finish back stitching, you'll need to apply a seam finish to your sleeve seam, and then you will repeat the same process of sewing the seam and finishing the seam allowance for the other sleeve. We'll finish the bottom edge of the sleeve. To finish the bottom edge of the sleeve, we're going to turn up 1/4 of an inch and press, and then we're going to turn up 1 inch and press that. If you are going to insert elastic for view B, then when we sew around the top edge, you'll leave an opening so that we can insert the elastic and then come back and close the elastic. To make the casing for the elastic at the wrist of the sleeve, we're going to fold up the edge of our sleeve 1/4 of an inch, and we're going to pin that, and we're going to do that around the entire bottom of the sleeve. Right. Once we get back around, then you can do the same thing on the other sleeve, folding it up 1/4 of an inch all the way around, and then once you have folded those up, press that to make it nice and flat and to get a good crease. After folding and pressing up the 1/4 of an inch, we're going to turn up the end of our sleeve 1 1/4 inches to make the casing, and then we will pin that around the sleeve. Once you finish pinning around the sleeve, then do the same thing to fold up the other sleeve 1 1/4 inches to make the casing. To sew the casing for the elastic, I've removed my part of my machine to make my machine a free arm so that I can mark the sleeve around the machine so that I don't catch the bottom side as I'm sewing this circle. I'm going to start at the seam, and we're going to stitch as close to this folded edge as we can, and we want to leave an opening for the elastic to be able to be inserted into the casing. We're going to use a regular stitch length. We're going to back stitch, and then we're going to stitch around the sleeve. We want to make sure that we get as close to the edge as we can so that we catch the raw edges that we folded under, as well as leaving enough room to insert the elastic into the casing. Once we get back to the other edge, we're going to leave about 1 inch opening from our original stitch length. We're going to back stitch, and then we're going to do the same thing to the other sleeve to sew the casing. To insert the elastic, you need a piece of elastic the size of your wrist, and you're going to take your safety pin, pin it through the end of the elastic, and then you're going to insert that through the opening in your casing and push up on the safety pin the fabric, and then pull to actually pull it through. When we get back around, we're going to pull the elastic back out so that we have the end. Take the safety pin off, and we're going to overlap the elastic just about 1/4 of an inch and pin that. Then you'll do the same thing to insert the elastic into the other sleeve. To finish the elastic, we're going to sew across where we have pinned it. And we're just going to make a couple stitches backwards and forwards across where we've stitched that. To sew that off. Once we've sewn that, then we want to push the elastic into the casing, pull the casing over top of it, and we're going to put some pins to hold our elastic casing. And now we want to stitch that shut. To stitch the casing shut, I've stretched the casing armhole over the free arm of the machine. I've lined it up where I'm going to start my stitches, which is where I ended the original ones. I'm going to back stitch, and then I'm going to stitch along the opening to close it. You're going to have to stretch the casing as you sew from the front and the back. You're going to have to help guide it through. When you get to the other side where your stitching is, stitch over those a little bit and back stitch. To attach the sleeve to the jacket, we're going to use the in the round method for setting a set-in sleeve. So with right sides together, we're going to pin the sleeve into the armhole, matching the notches and underarm seams, the small circles and the large circles at the shoulder. We're going to ease the top or the cap of the sleeve into the armhole, and then we will stitch. Once you have sewn the sleeve into the armhole, you will need to finish the seam allowance. To sew the sleeve to the jacket, we're going to turn the sleeve right side out. We're going to have the jacket wrong side out. We're going to insert the sleeve into the jacket so that we have right sides together. We're going to pin the underarm seams so that they line up. We're going to match our notches, so make sure that you have a double notch on your jacket, a double notch on your sleeve that are matching, to make sure that you have the left sleeve in the left hole for the arm and the right sleeve in the right hole for the arm. You should also then have 2 single notches that should be matching on the front of the jacket. If you do not have those notches that match, then you have the wrong sleeve in the armhole and you need to switch the sleeve. It is important that you put the right sleeve in each armhole, because the front and the back of our sleeves are slightly different sizes and it won't fit properly if you have the wrong sleeve in there. You should have a dot at the top of the cap of your sleeve. That dot should match up with your shoulder seam. So we want to go ahead and pin that. And then our sleeve is slightly bigger than our armhole. So to put our sleeve in, we're going to slightly gather on our basting stitch to ease that sleeve in. The space between our notch and our dots, that should fit smooth, so you can go ahead and pin that. Lining up the edges of your sleeve and your armhole. And then in the section at the top, then you want to just ease that sleeve into there to make sure that it fits the rest of the arm so that it lays flat. So we've done that for the back of the sleeve. We're going to do the same thing for the front of the sleeve. Okay, so now we have our sleeve pinned into our armhole. You can do the same thing to pin the other sleeve into the other armhole. To sew the sleeve to the arm, we're going to use a 5/8 inch seam allowance. We're going to start at the underarm seam. We're going to back stitch, and then we're going to stitch around the armhole, keeping the edge at 5/8 of an inch. Making sure that our sleeve is smooth, and we don't have any tucks in the fabric. When you get back around to the bottom of the sleeve, we'll stitch just over our stitches, and then we'll back stitch. Once you finish sewing the sleeve, then you'll need to apply a seam finish to the seam allowance, and then repeat the process to sew the sleeve into the other arm. After sewing in your sleeve, turn your garment right side out, and you can see if you have any of your basting stitches that are showing, you can pull on those stitches and remove the basting stitch from the garment so that it doesn't show on the outside of your stitches. To hem the jacket, for all the jackets, you will fold up 1/4 of an inch, and then you will fold up another 1 1/4 inches. Then you will do a shirt tail hem by top stitching along the folded edge of the jacket. To finish the jacket, we need to put a hem in the bottom of the jacket. So we're going to do a shirt tail hem that's been modified to be 1 1/4 inches deep when we're finished. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pin up 1/4 of an inch all the way around the bottom of the jacket. And once you've got that pinned, then press that so that you have a nice crease and it's flat. After folding up 1/4 of an inch and pressing, then we're going to fold up the bottom edge of the jacket 1 1/4 inches, and then we will pin that along the bottom edge of the jacket. To sew the hem of the jacket, we're going to edge stitch along the folded edge. We're going to use a regular stitch length. I like to start at a side seam. We're going to back stitch, and then we're going to stitch all the way around the bottom edge of the jacket. If you want to put elastic in the bottom of your jacket, you'll need to leave an opening in the stitching and then apply the elastic just as we did at the wrist in the sleeves. We get back around, we're going to stitch over our original stitches, just a few stitches, and then we're going to back stitch.